Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're all doing okay out there. Now, in today's video, I am going to be doing a movie review on 28 Weeks Later. Now, last week I actually reviewed 28 Days Later, so if you haven't seen that one yet, I will leave a link at the end of this video, but as promised, here is a review of the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, which in my opinion is a pretty good sequel. Now before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for all future updates. Okay, so 28 weeks later, it's exactly what it says on the tin. Now, the first movie was set in 28 days later after the first attack from that chimp attack, and then this movie is set 28 weeks later where the infected in Great Britain are now dead due to starvation. The US Army have entered Great Britain and is helping to reconstruct everything after Great Britain is declared free of infection. Now, in the opening scene of this movie, we are introduced to two characters, Dawn and Alice, a married couple who are hiding out in the countryside in this big house with a few other people. Now, I'm not quite too sure who these other people are. I am just presuming that they are close friends and neighbors, all sticking together and pretty much looking out for each other. And while they're all sitting down having food, there is a young kid knocking on the door for some help. Now, at first, some of the people in the house, they're quite reluctant to let this kid in, but when Alice sees that it's a young child, she persuades everyone to let him in. Now, the kid, he basically tells everyone that he was being chased by his mum and his dad, and they were trying to kill him. Before you know it, a load of the infected zombies turn up and smash their way into that house, and they start attacking and eating everyone that they get their hands on. Now, this is where things get a little bit messed up. Don ends up leaving his wife Alice inside the house with the infected and makes a run for it. Like, he literally leaves her there. I mean, I totally get that there may be some situations where you literally can't do anything, but Don literally just left her there to be eaten, and he makes a run for it through the fields, and he's then chased by a load of the infected, which is actually a pretty cool scene. Don then escapes after he climbs into a small boat, and there are some really intense scenes just before he gets away, but I just think we would actually be rooting for Don a lot more if he hadn't have just left his wife to die. Anyway, fast forward. This movie then follows two children, Andy and Tammy. Now, Andy is 12 years old, and I can't remember how old Tammy is, but she's like a few years older. I would say she's around 16. But Andy is the youngest that's in the UK at this stage. Now, Andy and Tammy, they are with a group of people who are brought back into the UK, and we learn how the US military and the government have been rebuilding things, and there are like safe zones and green zones, and basically there are still places in the UK that are pretty much out of bounds at the moment. Now, we learn that Andy and Tammy's dad is actually Don, and Don tells them a sad story about their mother's death and basically lies to them. He does not tell them what really happened. Now, I forgot to say that Andy actually has different colored eyes, which will play a big part in this movie as I get through it. Andy and Tammy, they end up doing something pretty stupid in this movie, and they end up escaping this safe zone because they want to go home and get a photo of their mum. Now, like I said, this part of the movie, it does annoy me slightly because really, all they had to do is maybe put in a request with some of the US Army or somebody in charge, and maybe somebody could have got the photo for them, but that's just me. I totally get why they would want a photo of their mum who's recently deceased, but I'm sure there could have been a simpler way. But saying that, when Andy and Tammy do get to their family home, they find their mother, Alice, still alive, but she's looking a little bit rough. Like, she kind of looks like one of the infected, but she's not full of rage. Like, what's going on? So when the US Army descend onto the house, they end up taking Andy, Tammy, and Alice back to base, and they're all isolated, and Alice is scrubbed and cleaned and is put through some awful treatment because the US Army, they wanted to make sure that they know what they are dealing with here. Now, it turns out that Alice also has the two different coloured eyeballs, and this has caused some sort of resistance against the virus. So she has been bitten, she is infected, but she isn't like one of them. She is basically just a carrier and she could make it spread. This then leads me on to a chain of events that unfold in this movie, because Don goes to visit his wife in private to see how she is, and Don then gives her a kiss, causing Don to actually become one of the infected, which then causes the outbreak to happen once again, and it spreads like wildfire, and then all hell breaks loose. Now, I'm going to start off with some of the positives in this movie, and one of those positives for me personally is they kept the same music from the original film. Now, in my previous review of 28 Days Later, I mentioned how much I loved that song, In the House in a Heartbeat. And that song was used 3 times in this sequel, and in each scene it added a huge intensity to the drama. It was first used at the start of the movie when Don runs away and leaves his wife, and it's then used again when the US Army are ordered to pretty much shoot everyone, and it's then used again for a 3rd time towards the end of the movie when the helicopter is leaving London. I just love this soundtrack, and I was super happy to see it used again in this movie. Another positive is the characters. Now, despite Andy and Tammy doing that stupid thing by escaping the safe zone and going to their family home, I actually do really like them as characters. I think they both bond really well as brother and sister, and I find them interesting. I also really like Scarlett, who is like the medic and in charge of the new arrivals and making sure that they're free of infection when they first arrive in Great Britain. And I really liked Doyle, who is one of the main army guys in this movie. In fact, I was actually gutted when Doyle was killed off in this movie. Another good thing about this movie is the way we actually get to see this virus spreading. Now, in the first movie, you don't really get to see any of that. We just get to see the after effects. But in this movie, we get to see it firsthand after Dawn is infected, and like I said, the virus then spreads like crazy, and the whole of this movie then changes, because as soon as everyone starts turning into zombies, the whole tone has changed and it's all systems go. Another thing that I think is kind of cool, and it certainly added to the tension in this movie, is how the US Army was left with no choice but to kill everyone, even people who weren't infected, even women and children. They had to kill everyone in order to save humanity, and all of the people who weren't infected, they then had to try and hide out, not only from the infected, but also from the army. It just added another layer and depth to the movie, in my opinion, and it gives you that feeling of fight or flight, and it makes you think, what would you do in that situation? And I just love how dramatic it all was when the army were all watching and realizing that they've lost control of the situation, and it's happening all over again. Now, if there are any negatives in this movie, for me, it would probably be it felt like it wasn't on for long enough. Now, what I mean by that is, I think because the violence didn't really start happening until around the 45-minute mark in this movie, the movie just felt a little bit short to me compared to the first one. Now, I did check online, and 28 Weeks Later is actually 1 hour and 40 minutes, pretty standard. But like I said, I think because the good stuff of all the infected didn't really kick in until halfway through the movie just fell a bit short for me. I mean, that doesn't mean that the first 45 minutes of this movie isn't great, because it is, it really, really is. It's interesting seeing an example of how Great Britain would rebuild after this type of situation, especially after the pandemic that we've all been through over the last 2 years. The only other negative for me is just the stupidity of Andy and Tammy breaking out of the safe zone and going to their family home, which I've already touched on. And like I said earlier, they could have literally just asked anyone in charge to do it for them. I'm pretty sure somebody would have. But apart from that, I am struggling to find any other constructive negatives from myself. I mean, I absolutely love the 28 Days horror films, and I totally wish that we had a 3rd sequel. Now, let's talk about the ending of this movie, because the way it ends, it does sort of indicate that there was every intention of there being a third sequel. So Andy, he ends up getting bitten by his own dad, Don, but Andy stays quiet because don't forget, Andy has those different colored eyes, which means that he is a carrier but won't actually become one of the infected. And when he and Tammy are saved and taken away by the helicopter, we are then left wondering what's going to happen next, because we then cut away and on the screen comes up 28 days later once again, and we then hear something coming through on an unknown radio, someone saying, we need your help, and wherever this place is or whatever it is, I think it's some sort of aircraft of some sort. I'm not sure if this is the helicopter that Andy and Tammy were on and maybe it crashed. It's not really explained properly, but what we then see is a load of the infected zombies running like crazy, like down a tunnel and running out into the Eiffel Tower, indicating that this virus has now spread across Europe and it's going to go worldwide, and then the movie ends. So like I said, it was looking like that we were going to be getting a third sequel, but for some reason, I have no idea why, but it never happened. All in all, I really like this movie. I think it's a great sequel to the first movie because, as we all know, sequels aren't always that great. So I think they really did a good job on this one. Okay, so let's take a look over at the Internet Movie Database and see how it's ranking over there. So it's currently got a 6.9 out of 10 at the time of me filming this video, and over on Rotten Tomatoes it has a 72% tomato meter with a 66% audience score. So it's not really a bad score, and to be honest, it's kind of what I was expecting for this sequel, but I love it. Now, I want to know if you love it. Are you a fan of 28 Weeks Later, or was it a bit of a letdown for you? There are no wrong or right answers, so leave your comments underneath this video and I will do my very best to respond to each and every one of you. Okay guys, well, thank you all for taking the time to watch this video today. If there are any other horror movie reviews that you would like to see me do on this channel, then let me know in the comments. Now, make sure you smash that subscribe button, stay safe out there, and I'll see you all again very soon.